So you know, like, general idea about what kind of problems there might exist. So what are the elements of a data quality initiative? How do you want to try to tackle these things? We're going to talk about 5 elements. So you want to look at quality issues, quality rules, quality assessments, a quality resolution process, and quality monitoring. All right, let's go into each one of these in a little more detail. So the quality issue is, it's important to sort of think of issues as objects to track and to manage, and not just sort of an abstract concept, right? So if you're dealing with if you create a process for intake of people reporting quality issues, or you have quality issues that are automatically reported, and that's really triggering this set of action for cleanup and fix up and resolution, it's really important. But you have to know how to sort of track issues, and so really thinking of this like you do with ticketing systems for other things, it would be really, really important. So it's also good to understand like how these issues originate. So they're ad hoc user reported issues that then maybe sort of perceived quality issues or not. Maybe you're identifying things from known historical issues that you've had, right? Maybe like you're not sure if there's a problem right now, but it's happened in the past, and people are kind of aware of these things that have come up before. Or there may be things that you're perceiving sort of as high risk issues that, like, if this were to be a problem, if we did not have good data here, it would really break things down. There's just sort of like the NASA cases, right? That, like, we can't afford to have the spaceship crash into Mars or whatever. So the rover is the word I was looking for in my head. So just thinking through the things that are critical and you got to make sure are accurate. So there's how you can sort of identify, like, think out like what issues that you want to avoid and what types of things. Or you might have automatically identified issues that are coming through from monitoring and things. All right. That's thinking about issues. Now the next one is rules. So rules are sort of kind of self-explanatory in a way, but they're documented things that standards around your data with which you can measure, and if those measures don't, if the measuring of those standards don't match your expectation, then that would then become an issue, right? So we like to think of, like many things in our system, is you've got functional versions and technical versions of this, and those can be the same things. A functional rule is something that says all employees must have an active manager on their job file, right? That may be something that you want to have, or whatever it might be, and that should be something that is defined using business terminology, right? And avoids data system specific language. It's something that could be applicable across any data system with that relevant data, right? And you want to define and agree on what that means functionally, so that if you change systems, or if someone's going to go to try to figure out how to create some assessments and measures on that, but for systems, you can. It's oftentimes that rule might apply across multiple systems. So the functional rule, it's harder to assess because you're not talking about it generally, but it's really important in order to derive the second thing, which is the technical rule. And so I think typically what we recommend is that you have both functional rules that have one or more technical rules. If you have just a technical rule on its own, it sort of can have an inherent functional rule that defines itself, but it's technical rules are things that can default from functional. So if I say that all employees must have an active manager, then you say, well, in our HR system, this is how that's set up. In our data warehouse, this is how that's set up. And that information about the technical rule should be describe sort of how to test it, right? Oh, this particular field on this particular column, this particular table must, cannot be null if this other value is there. And so, it's data system specific. It contains information necessary to find or select the issue. and you can construct a rule basically to look for that failure condition. Right. The next thing is assessments. So assessments is once you have a rule defined, how do you figure out like, well, how much are we in compliance with that rule? So there's sort of a quantitative assessment, which is usually at a point in time, and it would be sort of the number of rule violations out of the total scope. So that other example, you'd say, well, we have 500 employees, and we have 3 that don't have a manager. Okay, and so the assessment there is 3 out of 500. So, and as of this time, that particular data system had 3 out of 500. Okay. Now maybe you have the other data system where your payroll system, and you're like, oh, well, in that data system we have 0 out of 500. That that's interesting. You have a mismatch between systems too, in a way. But we recommend creating these threshold limits then to say like, all right, I do an assessment. What does an assessment even mean unless I understand how to qualitatively determine if that's a good assessment or a bad assessment. So there's sort of 2 ways that you can do this. One is that you can make an assessment by percentage, like, oh, we'll tolerate 10% of failure or something. I don't find that in practicality at all useful, but I find it incredibly useful to have an actual number. Like, we will tolerate 10 records, and it's not that those 10 records, like if we have 10 records, we don't care about those 10, like we're going to let that slide. The reason that you have that threshold is that you may have in your database 10 historic records that you don't care about and you're never going to fix because it's too hard to fix, and you just don't want to hear about them anymore. So the threshold really is, I only care when I have the 11th record, right? Now there may be a reason that you say I'm willing to tolerate 10% errors or whatever, but the threshold is really important to say, like, if I want to identify an issue, I want to say, like, if you just make your threshold 0, you might just always have problems, because that means that you have to clean up everything before you can continue to assess things moving forward. So anyway, that's what we recommend for a threshold. Once you exceed that threshold, that's when you can begin to have an issue. So our system kind of sets a high quality is something that has 0 issues. A medium quality is something that has more than 0 issues but's under your threshold, and then a low quality is something that exceeds your threshold. All right. Lastly, you might have these roll-up assessments. So if I have like a set of quality rules on the data system, you can sort of maybe roll that up to what's our overall assessment for the data system. How many of the quality rules we've defined, how many are we in compliance with or not. Maybe you also do that by functional area, like within the payroll area or the HR area, or maybe you do it by a glossary item where you've got a rule, but it's being used in lots of different places. I mean, a definition that's used in lots of different places, and you have rules in all those different places, and say, oh, our social security number is good in 5 out of 6 of the data systems it lives in, kind of thing. So managing sort of overall roll-up of assessments from these different areas is a good way to look at it. All right, we're time's flying here. So quality monitoring is the next thing to do. So these are sort of automatically generated assessments in the single data. You can do it with reports or queries. Our tool does it through sort of a query system. We recommend this approach where you have something like that does a scope count that kind of counts the total number of employees is 500, then a violation count. If you have that query, the total number that don't have a manager is 3, and then you have your threshold. If you exceed the threshold, there's this concept of a research query. So the assessment is 3 out of 500. If that creates an issue, then you can do research where it actually returns information about those failed records that can be used for root cause analysis. If you have multi-systems for monitoring, that's a little more complicated, or actually much more complicated, because you may need to aggregate the system into one database to query against or to research against. But it's possible if you can do that. It's even possible to do in separate places. It just can be sort of more slow and complicated. Lastly is the resolution process. I'm going to spend as much time as I can here, and then it looks like we might be a few minutes over. I apologize. That in the resolution process, first of all, you want to think of this as like a support ticket or customer support. If it's reported by a person, we're going to talk about that. If it's automatically reported, there's many of the similar steps, but not as much as you would do if it's reported by a person. So first is kind of acknowledge receipt of the issue, and then you want to research it, right? And to research, you want to route it to the appropriate data steward for doing that. And some of the ownership routing options are to go to just a general quality steward who researches everything, or maybe to go to like a functional steward if it's in a certain functional area, or a data system if it's in a particular data system, or some very combination thereof, a quality steward over this data system, or depending on how specific you want, but whatever makes sense for your organization and the right fit for that. But to route these issues for research. The goal of the research is to figure out, like, well, what's the actual cause? Is it an actual data issue? Is it a glossary issue? Is it a report issue? Is it a documentation issue? Is it a training understanding issue? Is it a false alert, like a bad rule and no issue? Is it a valid value change, something like that? And then based on that, once you figure that out, you want to get an assessment of an impact of the issue, do some root cause analysis, which is really important. Don't just fix the data, figure out what caused it. Then I then sort of take action on that. So either data cleanup, or to fix the report, or fix the glossary, or update the documentation. Once you've done that, if you determine that it's a real issue and you don't already have a rule for it, go ahead and create a rule to document what this is, and then set up monitoring against that rule so it doesn't happen again. So